Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where you'll hear stories about people who truly believe they can do whatever they want just by being themselves. Guys, before we dive into the stories today, take a look at this entitled woman who freaking sits down in a grocery store on some bread. Guys, she's using loaves of bread to pad her butt. It's just so ridiculous. How the heck did she think it's alright to just sit on loaves of bread? Okay, one more, guys. This person says, this luxury of having kids. You can use them as an excuse for anything. You guys see that? You see what she wrote? I have 2 kids. Sorry, no tip. Oh my goodness. Guys, leaving 0 tip is pretty bad, but acting like she's all proud of it by using her kids to avoid leaving a $3 tip is just crappy. She was better off not writing anything at all because that's a slap in the face. Guys, if you think those 2 were absurd, wait until you hear the stories in this one. So the first story, OP tells a tale about an entitled Karen in a hardware store. The second story, a neighbor gets upset over a tree house. The third, a sneaky woman tries to tell OP he's not allowed video games. And we'll finish off with a lovely story where a business owner gets what he deserves. My friends, I do hope you enjoy the stories today, and do hit that subscribe button for future Entitled People stories. Let's dive in. So I've been off work for a couple of weeks. I've been sick and injured, and I'm getting super bored cooped up at home all the time, so I decided to go visit my friend at a hardware store. So at the store, they have a pretty distinctive uniform consisting of blue jeans, steel-toed boots, and a company-issued red polo shirt. Now, before I go on, the shirt I wore is technically red, but it's like deep burgundy. So I head into the store and wander around for a bit trying to find him. I see him with a customer, and he sees me and says, "Hi sir, I'll just finish with this customer and then I'll come help you." Which is obviously sneaky code for, give me a minute dude, and then we can hang out. So I head down the back of the store and start fiddling with some socket sets, debating if I should buy one since I've lost my old set, and just killing some time until my friend comes to find me. And then I hear a sharp, ahem, from behind me. I turn around and see this woman, maybe mid-50s, staring right at me. Thinking she wants something from the rack I'm standing in front of, I say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then step out of the way. Now, she just looks at me for a second and then says, "I need 3 bags of mulch and I want them taken to my car." Now, I'm standing there quiet, trying to process what's going on, and she heaves this enormous sigh and goes, "Hello? Are you deaf or something? I said I need 3 bags of mulch and I want them taken to my car." And this is where I realize, oh crap, she thinks I work here. And I swear, I must have lit up like a Christmas tree because I've always wanted to either deal with a Karen or have something like this happen, so I have a chance to give them a taste of their own medicine. So I say, "Okay, well, first of all, the gardening section is down there at the other end of the warehouse, so I don't know what help you're expecting to get here." Karen then says, "Listen, I just want you to do your job and get me 3 bags of mulch." Now, my mind is racing, trying to think of all the sick burns I've seen people on the sub use, until I hit on a good combination. I told her, "Look, you can tell a lot about a person by the way they treat staff when they go shopping. It's clear from this interaction that you're a person who thinks they can treat people like slaves. Furthermore, it's company policy here not to tolerate people who treat staff members poorly, so I'm afraid I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." She practically hisses at me and says, "Who do you think you are? You can't talk to a customer like that. I'm gonna go get your manager right now. Consider your job done." She stares daggers at me for a few seconds, and I honestly think she's gonna try to hit me or something. And then she swings around and storms out of the aisle. I go back to trying to decide which socket to get. A minute later, my friend finds me in the aisle and is like, "Hey man, what's up?" And I explain what just happened word for word, and I say she's gone to get the manager, so you should probably bail if you don't want to get caught up in it. A couple of minutes later, she swings around the corner with who I assume is the manager in tow, and as she's stalking down the aisle, she points at me and says, "That one. That's the one who was rude to me." The manager says he'll deal with this and is terribly sorry for the inconvenience, and turns to my friend and says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a second over?" Karen interrupts and says, "No, not him. I don't give a crap about him. This one." And she points at me. The manager just stops and looks at me for like a solid 5 seconds, visibly confused, and says, "I think there must be a mistake here, ma'am." She responds, "What mistake? This rude employee refused to help me." Now, all three of us just look at each other, them in their blue jeans and bright red shirts, and me in my dark burgundy top. The manager says, "I assure you, he doesn't work here." Karen responds, "Then why is he in the uniform?" I told her, "Ma'am, my shirt is clearly a different shade. You know an eye doctor would be able to do a test for colorblindness if you just..." Karen interrupts and says, "He's being so rude to me. Are you gonna let him talk to me like that?" Manager says, "I mean, he's not staff, ma'am. I can't really tell him what to do." Now, at this point, Karen is squawking and says, "This is ridiculous. You are just trying to cover for him, so you don't have to do paperwork." The manager says, "Ma'am, really, I'm sorry that he was rude to you, but he's not staff." Meanwhile, my friend has walked off because he's getting a hernia trying not to laugh. And I'm standing there just laughing at this whole ridiculous situation. The lady goes ballistic and lumbers over to him, shoving him and screeching. She then says, "I will get you all fired. I'm gonna call your head office and tell them about the disgraceful treatment I've received." So the manager's trying to keep it together at this point, reiterates that clearly I don't work there, and if she needs assistance, he'll gladly have a real employee help her. The lady goes even redder. She stamps her foot and screams, and then turns around and stomps away. The manager looks at me and goes, "Just another day. What can you do?" I'm pretty sure my friend genuinely pissed himself laughing. I explained to the manager about my previous interactions with her and that I absolutely did provoke her, but she was being a total entitled idiot, so she deserved it. I apologized to the manager for any inconvenience this might have caused him, and he jokingly asked me not to wear a shirt that's even remotely red to the store anymore, just in case something like this happens again. I agreed, and he offers me a 25% off coupon for the inconvenience, and we all walked away happy. My friends, I love how OP was ready for this encounter and was actually looking forward to meeting a Karen in real life. Unfortunately, there are people out there like this who try to push around employees, and I'm so glad she came to OP first and got absolutely wrecked. That colorblind comment was superb. Oof. Absolutely savage, OP. So, I like to consider myself a pretty handy person. I can build stuff really well. Because my niece is back in school full-time and my sister works, she often comes over to my house for a couple of hours after school. Lately, she's been talking about wanting a treehouse and how she's really sad she can't have one at her home, since she lives in an apartment. I told her I had 2 very nice trees in my backyard that we could use. You should have seen her face light up. It was like Christmas for her. So we worked away, and by the end of the first day, we have a very nice floor and a rope ladder up. The second day, right after school, my niece is helping me saw some wood planks for a ladder when we hear it. My next door neighbor, whom I've rarely spoken to, comes out and says, "Hey, I asked, can we help you?" Now, I should point out that me and my neighbor share a fence, the tall kind, and you can't see through it unless you were smushing your face up against it. The neighbor says, "You can't have that." I'm sorry? You can't have a treehouse in your yard. I said, and why not? Is there a particular reason we can't have our treehouse? And I kid you not, Karen says, "Because if my son sees it, he'll want one too." Now, I'm speechless at this point and continue on with my work, telling my niece to go grab the paint cans in the garage. Niece and I continue with our work, with me sawing and her painting her wood. We work for another 15 minutes until we hear an ungodly shriek. Her kid comes out and shouts, "Mine! I want to play on it." This kid can't be older than 8, but he's throwing a fit, trying to climb over the fence. He says, "I want a treehouse. I want a treehouse." Karen then drags him by the arm into the house and stares daggers at me. And I'm not sure how to feel about this. Imagine that, having a neighbor telling you that you can't have a treehouse in your yard because their kid will want it. It's called telling your kids they can't have everything they want. It's good parenting. The next thing you know, the neighbor's gonna be letting her kid into OP's backyard when he's not home. My friends, I've read enough of these stories to know exactly how this is gonna go down. So this story happened earlier this week. To preface this, ever since the lockdown around the world, my church has been meeting online via livestream. This is extended to small groups now, which are done through Zoom meetings. This particular week was much like the others in terms of small groups. Bible talk, cracking jokes, and discussing pop culture. However, joining us this week was my friend's aunt from out of town, the entitled mother of the story, who from what I've heard had a tendency to have a holier-than-thou demeanor. At one point of the chat, we got to the topic of hobbies. I took a moment to discuss my hobby of gaming, which is my big mistake of the story. I talked about my gaming collection of different gaming consoles: Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube, PlayStations, etc., etc., and the games I've collected over the years, which my friends found to be super fascinating. So about 40 minutes in, I get a phone call from my friend's phone number. I picked it up only to be greeted by his aunt. She says, "Hello." I said, "Hey, what a surprise." And she responded, "Well, I want to talk to you about something. You mentioned that you had a collection of video games and video game systems." I asked her, "Yeah, what about them?" And she responded, "Well, you see, it's just that a strong Christian man like you shouldn't be wasting time playing video games. You should be dedicating your time towards getting married, starting a family, and teaching them the ways of God and the Bible." Now, I'm dumbfounded and said, "Wait, what?" Remember, the Bible tells men to put away childish things, and video games are definitely under that category. You should donate it to a child in need. Better yet, my son loves video games, and his birthday's coming up, so you should just give it to him. I'm sure he'd be grateful. Now, I'm starting to get real angry, and I said, "I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable doing that." And she responded, "I'll tell you what, I'm in town till Wednesday. I can call you back tomorrow. This gives you plenty of time to pray about it. Hopefully God will convince you to man up and put away childish things. Good night now." I sat there for a good 15 minutes, with anger stewing in my mind over the audacity of this woman. I wanted to call her back and curse her out until a light bulb went off in my head. At that moment, an evil Grinch grin crept across my face. My mind had just formulated a perfect response to the entitled mother's request. So the next day, I spent the day waiting for my friend's aunt to call me. In the evening, the moment came. I saw my friend's number ringing on the phone, and an evil Grinch grin came back to my face. I said, "Why, hello there. How are you today?" She said she's doing well, and have I thought about the conversation from yesterday? I told her, "Why, yes, I have." And she asked, "Well, what did you decide?" I said, "Well, I prayed long and hard about what you said, and I spent some time reading the Bible." She asked, "And?" I told her, "Well, growing boys are very pivotal to the future of the kingdom of God, and building a relationship with Jesus is very important to their upbringing. In all honesty, video games are just going to be a distraction to him, and time spent playing them is better dedicated to learning about the Bible." The entitled mom went silent at this point, and I kept going and said, "Remember, the book of Proverbs tells us to start children off on the way they should go, and tells us to bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So unfortunately, I will have to pass on gifting your son my gaming collection. However, I will gladly send a children's study Bible and a DVD collection of VeggieTales to him." I turned off my phone after that to make sure she couldn't call me back. Later that night, my friend sends me a message on Facebook apologizing for his aunt's behavior, and at the end of the day, I still have my collection and my hobby. Guys, this is the perfect example of an Uno reverse card at play. You're too old for video games. Give them to my kid. The Bible tells men to put away childish things. Nice try, lady. I see what you're doing there. Trying to be all sneaky bringing religion into this. So this story happened about 15 years ago, give or take. At the time, I worked for a small industrial railroad in my city that served about 20 different industries along the docks. To get to the docks from the yard where I would pick up the inbound cars, we had a mile of street trackage that ran right down the middle of a small street. Numerous pubs lined the street on one side, with a river on the other side. Now, because of city regulations, we were only allowed to operate along that span of track between specific hours, typically 11 o'clock at night to about 5 in the morning. However, since the bars were open at that time, it also meant that we had to trundle along at a crawl. Every night that I went down that street, there would typically be 2 or 3 people who had parked too close to the tracks, prompting me to have to get people to move their cars. Now, that wasn't a major problem, it was just an annoyance. Except for this one guy, this one entitled guy. It seemed that every single night I would have to stop about halfway down because this guy would always park his truck at an angle in the street, as opposed to parallel parking. Now, his truck was also very long. It stuck out about halfway onto the street. And every single night, I'd have to head into the bar this guy owned and bug the guy to get him to move his truck. Most of the time, it would take him a good 30 minutes to an hour to drag himself out and move the thing. This meant, of course, that I was losing time I needed to get my job done. After months of this, I finally decided that I had enough, so I decided to have the guy towed. And yeah, that didn't work out as well as I hoped. So it turned out the guy also had some job with the city, or the mayor's office, or some friend in either. So no one would dare come out and tow his truck. I think I waited there a good hour before he eventually came out and moved it, having the gall to flip me the bird as he left. Now, at that point, I decided that not only was I totally done with the guy, but if the chance arose, I was gonna teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Nothing physical per se, just a hard-learned lesson. So a couple days later, I found myself heading down the track with half a dozen heavy cars, with machinery bound for the docks. As I rounded the curve and neared the place where the guy always parked, I gently applied the independent brakes on the locomotive. This would slow the heavy train, but it wasn't enough to stop it outright, at least not quickly. I waited until the very last minute, laying on the horn and applying full brakes, bringing everything to a screeching halt right in the middle of the street. As I felt the brakes began to hold, there was this loud thunk and screeching and tearing of metal as the train simply punted the truck out of the way, tearing the bed clean off it in the process. Now, obviously, this did not go unnoticed, as a crowd started to gather out in front of the bar where they heard the train coming. I stay in the cab, calling back to dispatch and informing them that I had struck a parked car, and they needed to get police and a tow truck to my location. All the while, I could hear this guy screaming at the top of his lungs about how he was going to have me thrown in jail, sue the company, and all manner of things. Locking the doors, I opted to just wait in the cab for the boys in blue to arrive. Eventually, they pop around and start taking statements. I explained the problem, noting that I couldn't have simply slammed on the brakes due to cargo I was carrying, and that the only reason I hit the truck was because it was improperly parked. I added that the gentleman had been warned in the past that something like this could happen, and he ignored the warnings. The man, for his part, was simply livid. He was hopping around, he was yelling at me, he was yelling at the cops, and just beside himself. In the end, he was ticketed for his bad parking, obstruction of passage of a train, and his truck was totaled, and he ended up on the hook for paying for it. It took about 2 hours to clean up the mess, and I was suspended for a week during company investigation. But honestly, it was worth it, and I did not have any problems with him from that point forward either. Play dumb games, win dumb prizes, guys. The owner was told multiple times not to park his car like that, and he still did. Who the heck angle parks when every other car on the street parallel parks, sir? He definitely deserved it, and I'd almost pay money to see his car get mowed down by a friggin' locomotive. Guys, and that brings us to another end of r/EntitledPeople. We survived. If you guys missed the last episode of r/EntitledPeople, I'll link it right here. A crazy woman demands to buy OP's little brother. It's absolutely absurd. Check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.